Right now, there is a window open in Japan, and most people back home have no idea it is even there. For years, you probably heard the same things. Flights cost a fortune, Tokyo eats your wallet alive, and Japan is one of those trips you save for years to take once in your life. But that whole story is now out of date. Something has changed, and it is probably the single most important thing you need to understand before booking a trip to Japan right now. But while that bigger shift is what makes Japan so interesting at the moment, there are also a few ways to stretch your money even further that we have to go over. Firstly, flights. If you are flying from the West Coast, you can often find round-trip flights to Tokyo somewhere around $600 to $800 if you travel smart. But how do you actually land one of those fares or possibly go even cheaper? First, stay flexible with your dates. Use the calendar view on a flight search tool instead of locking yourself into one specific week. Sometimes moving your trip by just a few days can completely change the price. Japan also has some great shoulder season windows. Late spring and fall can give you beautiful weather while avoiding some of the heavier summer crowds. Second, look at the lower-cost airlines flying across the Pacific. If you can travel light, they can sometimes undercut the major airlines by a serious margin. And third, stay flexible with your airport. Flying into Osaka instead of Tokyo or Tokyo instead of Osaka can sometimes save you real money. You can always connect between cities later. And remember, these cheaper flights are only part of the story. They still do not explain why Japan itself can feel so surprisingly affordable once you arrive. Now let's talk about where you sleep, because this is the part that scares people the most, and it really should not. Japan has this whole world of clean, tiny, incredibly well-run business hotels that a lot of travelers outside Japan still do not really understand. The rooms are small, but they are spotless. They have everything you need, and in many cities you can find private rooms around the $40 to $60 range. That is not a hostel. That is your own private room, your own bathroom, and usually a quiet, safe place to sleep. And if you want to go even cheaper, capsule hotels can be your friend. You get your own little sleeping pod, shared facilities, and often a bed for under $30 a night. I know sleeping in a pod sounds strange if you have never done it before, but they are usually quiet, surprisingly comfortable, and honestly part of the Japan experience on their own. Then, on the other end of the spectrum, maybe you want one special night. You can stay in a traditional Japanese inn called a ryokan, sleep on tatami, experience a more traditional room, and maybe soak in an onsen. Do that once as your splurge, then use business hotels or capsules as your base for the rest of the trip. But here is another hack a lot of travelers miss. In Japan, location matters less than you might think because the public transportation is so good. You do not necessarily need to pay top dollar to stay right in the center of Tokyo. Stay a few train stops outside the most expensive areas, pay less, and you can still be back in the middle of everything surprisingly quickly. Your money stretches further, and you barely feel the difference. And this is where that bigger shift I mentioned at the beginning starts to become even more interesting because it does not just affect your hotel. It affects almost everything you buy. Now let's get into food, because Japan can genuinely be a paradise for a budget traveler. You can eat incredibly well without spending much if you know where to look. A big bowl of ramen that completely fills you up can cost just a handful of dollars. A hot beef bowl from one of Japan's fast food chains can cost about the same as a coffee back home. Conveyor belt sushi lets you grab plate after plate, stop whenever you are full, and still walk away without destroying your budget. And then there are the convenience stores. Japanese convenience stores are nothing like the sad gas station food you might be imagining. They are packed with affordable meals, rice balls, sandwiches, noodles, snacks, drinks, and genuinely useful food when you want something fast. So yes, I genuinely recommend using them. Now let's move on to getting around, because transportation in Japan can either eat into your budget or barely touch it depending on how you travel. First, when you arrive, get an IC card. It is basically a tap-and-go card you can use across many trains, subways, buses, and plenty of other places. Load money onto it, tap through the gate, and keep moving. For long-distance travel, the famous bullet train is incredibly fast and absolutely worth experiencing, but it is not always the cheapest option. So do the math before automatically buying a rail pass. Depending on your route, it can make sense, and depending on your route, it absolutely might not. And if your budget is tight and you are not in a rush, overnight buses can be a secret weapon. You travel while you sleep, cover a huge distance for relatively little money, and save yourself a night of accommodation at the same time. That is 2 wins from 1 ticket, and that is the kind of travel math I love. Now let's talk about how you can actually save with activities once you are there. A huge amount of the experience costs nothing. Walking through Shibuya Crossing is free. Exploring old temples and shrines is often free, and others only charge a small entrance fee. Wandering through parks, neighborhoods, markets, tiny side streets, shopping districts, and areas you have seen in movies for years costs nothing. Even when you do pay for an attraction, you are often talking about a modest entrance fee rather than something that destroys the entire day's budget. So, you do not necessarily have to choose between actually experiencing Japan and staying on budget. Also, let me give you a few smaller hacks that quietly save money. First, Japan's 100 yen shops. These places are dangerous in the best possible way. Snacks, gifts, travel accessories, random things you suddenly convince yourself you desperately need, and most of it costs almost nothing. And secondly, look out for affordable public baths, local sento, and free hot spring foot baths. A proper soak after walking around Japan all day is one of the best feelings in the world, and it does not have to cost much. So now, let's actually put all of this together. Flights aside, imagine you are spending somewhere around $70 to $90 a day once you are in Japan. That can cover a simple private room, good food, local transportation, and some sightseeing if you are careful with your money. Stay in capsules, eat cheaply, and travel slowly, and you can push that number lower. Want nicer hotels, expensive restaurants, nightlife, shopping, and bullet trains every other day? Of course you can spend way more. But that is the point. Japan is not automatically this insanely expensive destination people still imagine it to be. And here is where things get interesting, because none of the tricks I just gave you fully explain what is happening right now. Japan did not suddenly decide to become a cheap country. The ramen shops did not wake up one morning and cut their prices in half. Hotels did not suddenly decide they hate making money. So why does so much of Japan suddenly feel cheaper when you are arriving from the United States? Because the thing that changed was not necessarily Japan. It was your money. The Japanese yen has weakened significantly against the US dollar, compared with where it has traded at different points in the past. And when the yen is weaker against the dollar, every dollar you bring with you buys more yen. That changes the way almost every price feels. A bowl of ramen can still cost roughly the same amount in yen to the person living in Japan, but when you convert that price back into dollars, suddenly it feels cheap. The same thing happens with your hotel, your meals, your shopping, your local transportation, your attractions, almost everything. And that is the window I was talking about at the very beginning. All of those budget tricks help. But underneath all of it, there is one much bigger force making your dollar stretch further once you arrive. The exchange rate. You are basically walking into an entire country with more buying power than travelers from the US had during periods when the yen was much stronger. And that is why Japan can feel completely different from the expensive destination people still have in their heads. Of course, exchange rates move, and this situation will not necessarily last forever. So if Japan has been sitting on your travel list for years, this might be one of those rare moments where the math is finally working in your favor. So make sure to take action. And if you found this video helpful, make sure to subscribe, join the Ultimate Budget Squad, and become part of a community looking for smarter ways to live well without spending a fortune. Flex hard, spend smart.